Okay, so we don't have any disclosures related to this presentation. The learning objectives for this presentation today is to talk a little bit about competence by design, which is Canada's CBME, competence-based medical education. We'll talk a little bit about that model, and then specifically the role of coaching within the model. We're going to talk about key roles, responsibilities, and rewards of being a coach in our program, and then consider ongoing faculty development and learning needs as both coaches and faculty teachers, and also competence committee members. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the transition to competence-based medical education that has really occurred worldwide. Some of us were trained in the traditional model, which is a time-based model, or also called the T-steeping model, where someone would, like a resident, would steep in the educational program for a historically determined fixed period of time. So for us, it was 5 years in a psychiatry program. And the thinking was, is at the end, we'd become a pretty successful practitioner. There was an exam, a Royal College exam at the end, which was a high stakes exam, and determined our ability to go into independent practice. And it was really based on knowledge. And the problem with this model is that we weren't actually sure how competent practitioners were at the point of graduation. How well they would fare in our current system, and whether they would become lifelong learners. And many did, but some did not. And so in an era of more public accountability, we have the responsibility to ensure that really all physicians are consistently prepared to continuously meet our evolving patient need. And so the shift happened to competence-based medical education, which is really an outcomes-based approach to the design, implementation, assessment, and evaluation of our learning program, using a framework of competencies. And so in such a system, the curriculum is organized around outcomes and abilities expected from a resident. And that resident's advancement is really dependent on having achieved those outcomes. In some cases, CBME is a time-free system. It is not in our system. So competence by design, or CBD, is a hybrid CBME model, which was designed by the Royal College to work within the Canadian system. Sorry. So CBD really combines a time-based and an outcome-based approach to learning. And so in CBD, progression of competence happens within a structured but flexible curriculum, where competencies are required for practice, form a framework, and are organized into stages. So we've got various stages within CBD. And competence is no longer assumed, and promotion is no longer guaranteed on the basis of time spent. Residents have to demonstrate competencies and abilities to progress through those various stages. So transition to discipline, foundation of discipline, core of discipline, and transition to practice. And so in that way, time is used as a guideline and a resource. We have time frames for our rotations, and those are minimum timelines. So all residents do 6 months of outpatients, 6 months of inpatients in PGY2, and then there's 4 months rotations in PGY3. And within those rotations, they achieve the competencies. If they're not able to do so, then they can add time to the rotation, and that's why we have flex, which is a more flexible time period to be able to go back and add to competencies. And if they're able to achieve the competencies within that rotation faster, then they're able to spend the time they have left on their rotation to work on more advanced competencies within that rotation, whether it's outpatient, inpatient, etc. There's a lot of opportunities for feedback and coaching with CBD, and you'll be involved in that. And then residents play a greater role in planning their learning, tracking their progress, and that promotes the development of lifelong learning skills. So again, this is a link to the Royal College information about CBD. We've talked about CBD being a competence-based approach that focuses on outcomes. And the Royal College does provide a lot of guidance, tools, and resources. In CBD, residents have defined developmental stages of training. So there is, I'm going to repeat it again, transition to discipline at the beginning, then foundation of discipline, which occurs through most of PGY 1 and 2, core of discipline through PGY 3 and 4, and then transition to practice in PGY 5. And each of those stages has their own assessment plans, learning experience, and expected outcomes to help support the residents in that stage. There are more frequent assessments and more varied assessments in CBD that form the portfolio that we will be looking at the competence committee to see if residents are ready to be to progress and be promoted to the next stage. So lots of points of data for learning, which are less high stake, and together form that portfolio, which we then look at in the competence committee. And the Royal College is still a requirement, of course, but now it doesn't happen at the end of residency. It actually happens at the end of PGY 4, and we just had our first cohort this past year of PGY 4 do their Royal College exam. So programmatic assessment is one of the hallmarks of competence by design. And so in programmatic assessment, we have multiple assessments that are completed by different assessors, and these help foster learning. They provide meaningful feedback for the learner. And they're also collected into a portfolio. And each assessment forms a data point, which the competence committee then looks at all of this data. They really sift through it, they look through all of it, and we make meaning out of it. And so based on that review by the competence committee, we're able to make individual learning plans for each resident, and decisions are made regarding resident progression and promotion. So it's really, there's an iterative dialogue between the learner and the coach throughout the year, and especially before and after the competence committee around their various data and making learning plans to work on throughout the year. So Denise Richardson and her colleagues at the Royal College has developed this model to support learning and competence development within competence by design. And as you can see, I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but there are two distinct coaching roles within this model. There is coaching in the moment, which occurs after a clinical encounter. And there's also coaching over time, which can be done by a supervisor or a coach. And that happens either over the course of a rotation or in our case, over the course of the residency program. You can see here that the competence committee is also included. And as part of programmatic assessment, that's responsible for the regular review of the residents' progress over time, looking at multiple sources of data. You can see that all three roles are closely connected. In the middle, we have the resident learning with their e-portfolio, and each of these dots is meant to represent a data point. And you can see that coaching has a very important role in this, and the coaching feedback ring in the middle. So we're going to start by focusing on coaching within CBD. And so I'm going to encourage you to reflect about your experience with having a coach. Have you ever had a coach? How did they help you? How did you grow as a result of the coaching or being a coachee? And what facilitated learning and growth through coaching? And Erin, maybe we can turn the I lost my screen. I'm gonna... So a coach is a person who can help learners reflect on where their performance stands and how to improve. And some of you talked about that. And coaching is beneficial really for anyone who's pursuing optimal performance. Coaching is fairly new to medical education, but has been used a lot in the past in sports and in the arts for many, many years. So it's a lot more established there. And in competence by design, coaching facilitates learning and development of a resident's competence and may also shape their professional identity. So in competence by design, the role of the clinical teacher is really evolving from supervisor to observer and coach. And so when clinical teachers observe the work the residents do, these observations provide learning opportunities. And so they're really coaching in the moment. And coaching in the moment is foundational to competency-focused instruction and workplace-based learning. It's authentic, it's timely, it's efficient. The process occurs in the moment, so it's important to provide that coaching as close in time to the to when the observation has occurred in the clinical environment. And so, as you all know, like clinician supervisors observe residents doing their daily work. They then share those with the residents in a way that guides the learning and improvement. And then the observation and comments are documented for the resident learning portfolio. And each of these observations are supposed to be low stakes. They're for the resident learning. They are documented and put in our portfolio, so later we can look at them all together and look at patterns, right? Look if there's something that comes up over and over again that maybe we need to focus on more. And a lot of this is done through EPAs, so entrustable professional activities, which are, as you all know, key tasks of a discipline that an individual can be trusted to perform in a given clinical context. And we're looking to see how much support the resident needs or if they're able to do it independently. And so taken individually, each of the EPAs is really intended to be formative, to help the learner for the purpose of learning. But taken together, the formative does become summative. And so EPAs are like little data biopsies or snapshots into clinical work. So no one observation is used to judge competence or entrustability or make progression decisions, but together they really help provide a picture of how the resident is progressing towards competence. And this isn't just around EPAs, it's also around all data points. So we get EPAs, we have ITARs, we have SCASERs, we have lots and lots of data points in the program that we can put together. And as part of coaching over time, coaches can really help guide their coachees on how to synthesize the assessment data that the resident gets from a variety of sources and contexts in order to adjust their behavior and their performance within that context. So as you all know, each resident in our program is also assigned a coach, and this is for coaching over time. And the goal of that is to support progression over time and help a resident become a competent clinician who's really a self-directed and lifelong learner. So coaches follow their coachees generally from PGY1 through to PGY5. It's a non-evaluative position, so coaches don't assess residents the way a supervisor would. A coach really cultivates a trusting, supportive, encouraging relationship to help foster improved clinical performance. So together, the coach and the resident will review and reflect on the coachee's assessment data. And the coaches can help the residents create a learning plan to ensure that they are learning, improving, and progressing through their residency training. Some coaches may also develop a mentorship relationship with the resident and help provide guidance on career planning, but a mentorship relationship is not necessary for the coaching relationship. So roles of the coach. As a coach, you'll also be assisting the residents in making sure they're meeting all their training requirements. So you'll look through all the data and make sure they're doing what they need to be doing at each stage. And there are lots of requirements for each stage. STACERs, quality improvement reports, psychotherapy. You'll also provide a space to speak about the intersection between learner well-being and development of competence. And we know that that's really important. So you're not there to be the resident's therapist. And if additional resources are needed, then you can refer them to OLA, our Office of Learner Affairs. But that balance is important, and you'll be checking in on that. You might help facilitate networking and foster scholarship development if that's of interest to the resident. And I'm borrowing from Ivan Silver here, but you might also help the resident, coach the resident to coach the supervisor, so to help advocate for their needs, whether it's in getting more EPAs or other things that are happening. So coaching involves regularly scheduled discussions and meetings with your coachee. And the recommendation is to meet every 2 months. And this is an outline of what we found is helpful for meeting times, although it can vary for each coach-coachee pair. Our competence committee are held in November and in May. So it's always very helpful to meet before the competence committee and after the competence committee. Before the competence committee, you'll be getting the portfolio of your coachees. So that has all their assessment data in it, and it's really helpful to meet and look at that together, review it, and discuss the data. They'll later be discussed at the competence committee. You'll also be able to discuss with the residents if there's something that you should bring up at that meeting. And then after the competence committee, there'll be a competence committee report, and then you can review that with the resident and make a learning plan going forward. And then we've got the August and the February meeting as check-ins, regular check-ins, to see how the new rotation's going, the new academic year is going, and be able to work on these things. And I found it really helpful to always schedule the next meeting with my coachee at the time, because I think if you wait the 2 months and try and schedule it then, it sometimes scheduling becomes difficult. On our website, we have a coaching checklist, which is a really useful document, I think, because it goes through all the requirements of the program and things that you might want to check in with your coach. And so we've got the link included here for that, but it's on our website under coach resources, I think. So something new that's coming this year is a personalized learning plan. Oh, and John, I see you've got a question.
Just one other area of their education and training that comes up in more of the senior years is preparation for the Royal College as well.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. So before each competence committee, all residents submit a self-reflection, and this is a mandatory component to the competence committee. They talk about goals they might have and areas for development that they're working on. And we've added a personalized learning plan to that self-reflection. This will be mandatory in PGY 5 because it really aligns with the transition to practice EPAs, where all residents need to do this. But it's available for all residents from PGY 1 to PGY 5 to use. And I think it is a helpful way of looking at the goals and how they're going to achieve them, when they're going to achieve it. You know, it helps if a resident is experiencing challenges to be able to problem solve those and help come up with a plan. It's also really helpful for really competent residents who are doing really well to look for other opportunities for advancement and goals, whether it be around scholarly work or clinical work. So we're excited to hear how this goes and get your feedback about these personalized learning plans. And then our coaching model is really unique in that all of our coaches sit on the psychiatry competence subcommittee for their coachees cohort. So let's talk a little bit about competence committees. The competence committee is a subgroup of the residence program committee, so in our case, PRPC. And it's basically a group of faculty members who meet on a regular basis to synthesize assessment data for the purpose of adjudicating learner progression towards unsupervised independent practice. So ultimately, the purpose of the competence committee is to demonstrate accountability to the public, right? It's our way of ensuring that our learners are going to provide high quality, safe care to patients while training, and also once they graduated and are out in practice. And so our competence committees are composed of the coaches for that cohort. Another hallmark of programmatic assessment is this decoupling of the assessment moment from the decision moment. So a clinical supervisor, their primary role is to provide coaching in the moment, formative feedback. They also complete IDARs at the end of the rotation to let us know how the resident has done on that rotation and about the competencies that were achieved. But they don't make high stakes decisions about progression and promotion. So that's done by the competence committee that's able to look at many observations and assessments, whether it be EPAs, IDARs, STACERs, COPE exams, all of it comes in, and then the competence committee is able to make those higher stakes decisions. And so it's kind of like here, each of the scientists is blindfolded and they're only given one data point to make an assessment of what that particular thing is. But with more data points, we're able to get a bigger picture understanding and discover that this is in fact an elephant. And so that is the work that the competence committee does. They look through all the qualitative, quantitative performance data, interpret their meaning, and then make a decision and recommendations. And we do this with a developmental approach and a growth mindset. So in the past, we used more of a problem identification model. So we felt that in general, the residency program would lead most residents to competence and success by the end of training. And in the past, the goal was to identify the few that were struggling, focus on problem solving and a remediation plan. Now we're really looking at it as with a growth mindset. There's stages that the residents need to go through, and we're going to support them in going through that towards competence. And, you know, there's some people progress to take a bit longer to progress to the next stage of training. They might not have achieved entrustability in all the EPAs yet, and they might do it by the next competence committee, and that's okay. And the competence committee here can advise on individual needs for each learner to help them in their learning. So the competence committee, as we've discussed, really guides resident learning and growth. It really reviews and modifies the resident learning plan when they look at all of the data together. And there's a section that talks about areas of strength and areas for development. And then they're empowered to make decisions on achievement of entrustability, learner status, which we'll review in a bit, promotion from one stage to the next, a promotion from transition to discipline to foundation of discipline, and so on. Readiness to write the Royal College exam. And then at the end of residency, really readiness for unsupervised practice. And so these decisions are made by the competence committee, but they are ratified by our psychiatry residency program committee. So after each round of competence committee meetings, I take the decisions to PRPC and review really high level stuff there, and those decisions are ratified. So going back to our competence committee, coaches are really key members of the PCS. And we have a longitudinal cohort model. So we have multiple competence committees. We've got one for PGY1, one for PGY2, and so on. If you're a PGY1 coach, you will be sitting on the PGY1 competence committee. And then next year, you'll transition to being a PGY2 coach as your coachees go on to PGY2, and then you'll be sitting on the PGY2 competence committee. Coaches act as primary reviewers on the competence committee, but they don't review the file for their own coachee. And they also don't vote on decisions around their coachee's progression and promotion. They are able to advocate for their coachees there. And by sitting on the committee, they gain a really in-depth understanding of what's needed for residents at that stage of training to progress and be promoted. And they're able to have better discussions there than in the coaching sessions around this. So this comes from the Royal College. All residents need to be reviewed by the Competence Committee twice per year. The Competence Committee really looks and considers all data. So we look at the quantitative and the qualitative data, and we really love qualitative data. It really provides a much richer understanding of where the residents are at. We provide guidance on progress and make decisions about progression and promotion. And by checking in regularly, we are able to make sure that all the requirements of our disciplines are met as the residents go through the program. In contrast to the past, when we often presumed that this was happening, there were some checkpoints, but really the Competence Committee allows us to check in about all of this twice a year, which is quite helpful. And then use the data to make high stakes decision and make recommendations for future learning activities for each resident. So you will all be primary reviewers on the Competence Committee, and you'll get a set of files. It's usually somewhere around 4, occasionally it's 3, and then other times it's 5, but we try and make it no more than 5. That you will review for the Competence Committee. So, and these are not for your coaches, these are for other residents in the cohort. So you will review the resident file prior to the meeting. And then at the meeting, you'll present the relevant and supportive data. And we have a template that helps you present the data in a way that ensures that we look through all the data for all the residents in the same way. And that way we don't miss anything and it's really equitable between everyone. When you present, we'll ask that you highlight patterns that you might see. So there might be similar feedback on several different assessment data, and you might break that out and also point out any outlier assessments that you found. And this review is going to inform the group discussion. So primary reviewer usually reviews it. We pause so we can all think through the data, and then we have a discussion before we make a recommendation around progression and promotion. As Erin will know, we have more and more sources of data each year. So in the spring, we just added the psychotherapy log. And so we have lots and lots of assessment data. And all of this is available to the resident and their coach prior to the Competence Committee meeting. I think this is really important. We make decisions at the Competence Committee as a group. We really use the wisdom of the crowd to make decisions because we know from the literature that small groups make better decisions than individuals, even expert individuals. So it improves the validity and reliability of the decisions we make and the actions taken based on that assessment data. And, you know, the literature talks about how groups tend to generate more ideas, are more likely to notice errors, have a better collective memory, and use more data in drawing conclusions. And so they're really helpful in making a plan and looking at all the data. And diverse groups make better decisions than homogeneous groups. And so we always really encourage, if there's any divergence opinions, for people to speak up during the Competence Committee, because we need to hear all viewpoints in order to make a really good decision. And so we do look at group functioning and how we can mitigate bias within the Competence Committee. We keep all our biases in mind, including groupthink and implicit bias as we make these decisions. And we have strategies in order to mitigate that bias. And I think I've talked about many of them. We try and have diverse membership, different coaches that some are new to practice, some have been in practice for many years in different subspecialties at different sites. We have faculty development. We have a presentation template to ensure that the data is presented the same for each resident, and we make sure that we look at the same data for each person. We encourage people to make individual judgments in their head before discussing it as a group, and that's to mitigate groupthink. And we invite dissenting opinions and have a discussion when there's differences within the group. So ultimately, we have to make decisions about progression and promotion. And this is the overview of the learner status. So residents can be progressing as expected, not progressing as expected, or failing to progress. If a resident is off, then they may be inactive. And then within that, there might be a modified learning plan. So a resident might be progressing as expected, but maybe need to get more EPA. So there might be a modified learning plan to focus on that. And so those are our progression decisions. And then we also make promotion decisions. And that's at certain points, residents are ready to be promoted from one stage to another if they've completed all the required competencies for that stage. And then as a competence committee, we promote residents to foundation of discipline or to core of discipline. We also promote residents if they're eligible to write the exam. And we will be promoting residents to Royal College certification eligible at the end of this year. One thing that the competence committee sees is really the bigger picture. So by sitting on the competence committee, you get an in-depth knowledge of trends, and the competence committee gets insight as to how the curriculum and program of assessment are unfolding in practice. And so sometimes we notice things about particular sites or particular rotations, and we might be able to take that back to the PRPC and make changes within our curriculum. For example, if we notice that residents in a particular site are not able to achieve a particular EPA, let's say the neurostim EPA, and so we're able to look at other sites or either discuss with that site if they're able to provide more experiences in that particular competency, or if we need to reach out to other places to help do that. And so, and this highlights a bit of the communication that happens after the competency committee report is generated and the decisions are made. Our PRPC ratifies all of the recommendations. We talk about trends, and we can look at improvements to the curriculum and program of assessment. So it has a bit of a QI role. And also we make recommendations sometimes for faculty development to fill gaps. The resident and the coach each get the progress report. And then one of our program directors will contact all residents who did not receive a status of progressing as expected. So if someone is failing to progress or not progressing as expected, they will hear from the program in order to help them make a more enhanced learning plan as to next steps. And then we also have a resident assessment and support subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of the competence committee. And if residents are experiencing challenges, they might be referred to that committee. And that's a recommendation that comes from either the PCS or the program director directly. And during that committee, we're able to take more time to discuss each resident. So we have about an hour or 2 hours to discuss a resident, and we're able to make a much more in-depth enhanced learning plan than we are at the competence committee, where we have a bit, we don't have quite as much time to go through each resident file. And so just some highlights, sound programs of assessment and health profession education serve the public interest. Assessments must not only support sound judgment about learner competence, but also generate meaningful feedback to guide learning, and the coach has a big role in helping the resident do that. And all the individual assessments contribute to a bigger picture, and the collection of pieces serves as the basis for judgment about competence within a CBD and programmatic assessment. Coaching over time allows for a more individualized learning process and optimal performance. And high stakes decisions are made by the competence committee, which really rely on the wisdom of the crowd.